Baker Botts, LLP, provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice and are not intended to establish an attorney client relationship. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Welcome to the AI Council Code. The AI Council Code is here to keep you up to date on all the AI legal issues arising in the modern business frontier. I'm Mark Speegle, hosting this podcast for Maggie today. Today we have Jesse Adland from AMD here to provide some perspectives on AI legal challenges from the view of an in-house counsel. Jesse, I've known you for several years, but why don't you give a quick introduction to people listening?
Yeah, I'm a director in the law department at AMD. I support our AI group, which includes our data center graphics business unit, but also our AI PCs and a bunch of software associated with those two product lines.
How long have you been assigned to the AI group?
I've been at AMD in a number of roles over the years. I've in aggregate about 11 years as an engineer, as a patent attorney, and now about 2.5 years in this role with the AI group.
And is the AI group pretty new at AMD? Have you had an AI group there for a while?
It's relatively new. It was reformed sort of out of pieces of other product groups that sort of came together under a single AI umbrella about 1.5 years ago.
There's been a lot of businesses refocusing around AI in the last few years. Is that something that's been a trend in the industry?
Yeah, I think it's hard to avoid AI these days. It's been game-changing at every level of the business across the industry. So it's been very interesting to have a close-up seat to watch some of this stuff unfold.
And so what are some of the examples of your role as an in-house counsel where you have an AI-specific problem that you have to think about?
Yeah, well, at AMD, we have a different perspective on the industry than many companies, right? We are a producer of chips and products that do AI behind the scenes in data centers or on your laptop. So very early on, we recognized the need to run our AI business responsibly, right? And have set up a lot of infrastructure kind of to do regular status checks on ourselves to make sure that our practices are in line with the industry and that we're behaving as a company in a responsible fashion.
That's a great segue to something I think is a really interesting question, just all the different people that label themselves as AI companies. Some of them are software companies, some of them are hardware companies like yourselves. Can you talk about just the different AI stakeholders that are in the industry?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes the AI space so interesting these days is how dynamically and rapidly that is changing, right? I mean, you can certainly read a lot about the big hardware providers, AMD and AMD's competitors. The consumers of AI take a number of forms, right? Some of the largest companies in the world are consuming and using AI products, but also now putting out AI end products into end users. So we go everywhere from multinational mega data centers to smaller cloud service providers to individual enterprises, and then ultimately on to end user products. And so at each step, as you go from a chip provider all the way out to an end user, there's a different set of concerns that you need to think about on how AI is used and consumed and understood.
There's also different levels of innovation, right? There's the innovation, you think about AI innovation, they probably think most about something like ChatGPT or some of the Gemini models from Google or some of these kind of the models that get a lot of the headlines. But there's a lot of innovation around AI kind of upstream and downstream, right? There's both the silicon manufacturing innovation that has to make this stuff work. And then there's the innovation that goes into the downstream applications where you have to figure out how you're going to use the AI models in different applications. I assume most of what you do focuses on the upstream silicon area, right?
Yeah, that's the primary focus of my job right now. But as a company and just as somebody who lives in the tech world today, I'm focused on both ends of the pipeline, I think as we all are, to try and figure out what are the ways that AI can impact our day-to-day lives in addition to just like core job responsibilities. So it's been fun to watch as more products have rolled out and with more capabilities. My kids even on tablets at home or under well supervised, I should say, but are able to access AI tools at school. We've played around with ChatGPT and we've played around together with image generation models. They like to draw pictures of pets with Gemini. That's always a good
creating a bedtime story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's great. And I think that leads to a lot of interesting intersections where you think about if you are the silicon company, what makes sense for you for helping develop AI may not be the same thing that you talk about for consumers when they're trying to pick the AI they're going to download on their phone. Do you ever run into a language disconnect where you're saying AI and you mean something different from a company or a person, stakeholder who's coming to you with a problem when they say AI?
Yeah, I think there's the foundational question that we're all always asking ourselves, which is what actually is AI, because many of the machine learning techniques that have undergird the revolution that we've experienced over the last couple of years have actually been around for quite a long time. So even when we're trying to create policy or understand as a company how to handle AI and how to use AI as a company responsibly, we have to first figure out what actually qualifies to be addressed under these policies. And it feels like it should be an easy question, and it quite quickly becomes challenging when you see it kind of moment, right? On a use case by use case project and concern by concern, we are able to talk with the stakeholders and make sure we understand what they're doing. And this, I spend a lot of time talking to people about what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? And how are we going to go about doing this to make sure that we're getting ahead of the things that they might, as engineers or as business people, may not be perceiving as a risk in either sort of the practical domain or in the legal landscape.
Yeah, and I think that's a continual challenge for lawyers in all areas of technology, trying to keep up with stuff that's changing really fast. And I think that AI has certainly been an area that's changed quickly and in ways that we're still just trying to understand. Have you seen in your role as an in-house counsel some of the challenges that come from just how quickly the field is changing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple axes that impact companies like AMD quickly. The first is the regulatory front, and I heard a talk that you gave a couple weeks ago, and it's astounding how quickly laws and regulations are developing in jurisdictions around the world, and keeping on top of those things is a challenge. Translating sort of high-level regulations to practical guidance for the business people who are working in the business units that I'm supporting, another challenge. But also, I think inevitably there's going to be some use case or project at AMD and some constellation of regulations where we're going to get into a place where it's just impossible, where they're just contradicting rules and guidance about how we're supposed to go about our business. You have competing concerns about being transparent and disclosing information while also protecting privacy, right? And with the number of different regulators who are playing in the area, it seems probable that there's going to be a problem with no solution. The other way that we see rapid change is with things like new products or new models that came out. DeepSeek hit the news a few weeks ago, and it's surprising, I think, for me personally, just to see how quickly technological innovation can change the conversation in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, that almost seems like a competition between the software innovation that's going to make things less reliant on the hardware and the hardware innovation that's always going to be faster than the software.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the very low-level details of our chips, right? I mean, that's not directly my job, but architecturally, there are companies that make GPUs like AMD. There are companies that make application-specific accelerators for AI workloads, and there's not even really settled answers as to what products are going to work well for what models and on what timeline. And so I know that the team and the industry is always looking at the pace of innovation and how things are going to play out. And there's no easy answers to be had in this space.
When you're dealing with a space that's changing so quickly, and there's new regulations and new customer concerns and new things happening quickly, how do you triage which problems have to go to the top of the list?
Yeah, well, I work on a great team. We communicate with another quite well and quite efficiently. I think, like any other in-house position, the key differentiator between the successful in-house attorney and not is the degree to which you're able to engage with the stakeholders and the business units and the engineers that you support. And so it has to be a living conversation. They have to feel comfortable picking up the phone a lot. I'd rather have 10 calls that are a waste of time to make sure that I get the 11th so that we can identify those things that stand out or could really be a problem. And that's just a lot of networking. It's a lot of building relationships and building trust and educating the teams on key ideas to be aware of or to flag for internal review to make sure they know to call, because that's the nightmare. Any kind of lawyering is at best an imperfect science, and it's the one that gets away without you even knowing about it that can sometimes be the biggest problem. So,
Absolutely. So I know that as the product that you're offering is most often going to be the hardware upstream AI technology, but are you also a consumer of AIs in terms of AI tools being used by your engineers?
yeah, not so much myself directly, but like any big company, AMD, and I think everybody else in the industry is looking for ways to use AI to streamline our workflows. There are areas in which that's a very mature practice, right? Copilot is a very famous code generation software. There are areas where I think that's less clear how AI will impact everyday work streams, but it's a never ending conversation these days about where we can use AI and for what purposes.
Yeah, how is that intersected? I know you're an intellectual property lawyer originally. I myself, an intellectual property lawyer, that always makes me a little bit anxious when the engineers are using AI in their development process because there's so much evolving law and evolving policy from the patent office and the copyright office about what the people own. Do you have any perspective, and I'm not putting you on the spot for AMD, but just as an intellectual property lawyer looking at this space, do you have thoughts about how that's shaking out in the law and what we can expect?
Yeah, I think like every other area, it's evolving so quickly, even with that. The Copyright Office, I think, just put out a big new set of guidance very recently. I think it's always a balance between trying to provide your internal clients practical advice, also not letting things go off the rails. So I think there's this nightmare scenario at software companies or other tech companies where you let AI draft all your code and all of a sudden you don't own any of the IP that underlies your company's major innovations. And at that point, you've got a real problem. It is an area where constant education is critical, and we're always trying to stay up to speed to make sure that when we do use AI, that it is in a way that is aligned with AMD's business interests. And I think with any company would be in the same position that you need to be thoughtful about what tools you use and for what purpose.
As a follow-on and a related issue, something that I think about a lot is if the ownership and what you can go and actually apply for ownership of patent office and copyright office and the AI space is so much in flux. But you're already seeing companies like OpenAI and others go out and sign licenses for training data and sign licenses relating to either consuming or supplying AI services. How do you manage those kind of contracts and licenses, which businesses have to engage in right now, while there's so much uncertainty in the law in terms of what you're actually going to own?
I think the safest way to go about things is to try and make sure you own what you say you do before you go into the contracting process. So there's a lot of diligence that goes into business practices to make sure that you actually have a solid foundation of ownership to underlie those licenses. There's so much churn and so much that is uncertain in how the case law is going to shake out that it's just a constant exercise in judgment,
Yeah.
which is a scary thing sometimes as an in-house attorney. It's easier to work in well-trodden areas of the law. But here, as a team and as a company and as an industry, I think people are doing the best they can with what we know today.
I know we're running low on time, but I think one of my favorite things to ask in these conversations is just some total speculating and looking in your crystal ball and asking if you were going to imagine what AI is going to be like in our world in 2 years and in 20 years, what would you say?
Yeah, in 2 years, I think the way in which AI has penetrated our day-to-day lives is really going to be different. Already you see it changing the way that kids learn in schools, right? The way people digest information and the way people create output for their jobs. And I think that's going to become more entrenched. I think the tools that leverage those models are going to be more polished and more accessible and start to show up on more and more of our day-to-day devices. In 20 years, we're either going to be in a paradise or something that's out of a dystopian sci-fi novel. I think it's very hard to imagine on that kind of horizon, but I do think AI is a real phenomenon that's here to stay. And I think the ways in which it pans out in our daily lives is going to be a very interesting ride to watch over that horizon.
I think you're 100% right about that in terms of how much AI is going to be a big positive phenomenon. My guess is we're not going to call it AI in 20 years. We'll call it something else that's more grounded as all the cycles continue to go here.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, thank you again for listening to the AI Council Code. We are so glad that you joined, and thank you again to Jesse for coming and talking with us today. Stay tuned for additional podcasts and more insights on your AI legal issues.
Thank you for listening to this BakerBots podcast. BakerBots has the experience, knowledge, and people to address our clients' most significant legal issues. For more information on BakerBot's practices, please visit us at bakerbots.com. This presentation is provided by BakerBots LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.